Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. We are looking at a big story today. The show is called The News Night, and I'm Deepthi Sachdeva. This, remember, has been a day of a sudden roar by China. You must be thinking that we've been talking about Pakistan all along, and today we are talking of China, because that is the real story. And all this has happened, ladies and gentlemen, just after its all-weather junior partner, and I call it a junior partner with a reason. Pakistan's humiliating pounding that you have seen over the last 1 week by India. Now, China chose its conventional cartographic aggression on Arunachal Pradesh. What is cartographic aggression? This is where you use maps and want to, just play this aggressive game by tinkering with the map of another country, something that you have seen China doing again and again. They've been doing this with Arunachal Pradesh. Now, India was very quick to rebuff this and call their bluff. But has China again done this with a reason? Was it to deflect and cover up the monumental failure of Chinese jets and missiles that we have seen for Pakistan? Now, you would recall during Operation Sindoor, we've seen those images, and we'll also try to put some of them on our screens right now. A lot of these Chinese weapon system and the missile system actually could not handle the might of India's weapons, of India's defense system. As widely perceived, China possibly is a bigger threat, is what a lot of people say. A surprise threat maybe, the real elephant in the room, the dangerous dragon that is ever present for India. So that is the story we are keeping our focus on. In fact, let's look at that, and we'll get you our key question as far as this particular story is concerned. The question we are asking, that China, ladies and gentlemen, follows Pakistan, and this is the dragon alert. India was quick to respond to this dragon alert, but what could happen over the next few days to the next few weeks, that is a story that we are talking of, and I will, without wasting time, introduce our panel of guests now joining us. We'll see if we can get them on our screens before I also get you our straight questions. As always, in just a moment, I just see DP Srivastavaji, who's a former ambassador, also waiting from Brahmachalani, and Prabhu Dayal, who a strategic affairs expert and a former ambassador, to join us in just a moment. But Srivastavaji, with your permission, I want to take up our straight questions first up, till we'll get another panelist also, and then we'll discuss that what has happened from Pakistan to China and how are we looking at India's response so far. The first question will go up on your screens, and the first question reads, is this a clear-cut provocation by China, and why again now? That is the operator word, why and again now. That is what we'll try to find out. This brings us to our second straight question. Are we looking at a synchronized China-Pak game plan? Because many people have been talking about this nexus of sorts when it comes to both China and to Pakistan. The third question now is up on your screens. Is China more dangerous? A lot of people have been saying this, that Pakistan perhaps is not as big a threat as China is. Is that true? We'll also find that out during the course of this discussion. This brings us to our fourth straight question. Is the Arunachal ploy, ladies and gentlemen, to deflect from China's Pak failure? Look at that word and read it very, very carefully. China's Pak failure, because it was Chinese-based missiles and their defense system that you have seen completely pummeled by India as far as the exercise goes. This brings us to our fifth straight question. We've seen an uneasy ceasefire, because what Pakistan next does, no one knows, and also a two-front war. Something we've been seeing that India has been speaking about for the longest time. Is that danger real and right now present? I also now do see both Brahmachalani and Prabhu Dayal joining us. Gentlemen, good evening and thank you for your time. Let's begin this conversation with Prabhu Dayal, who's a former ambassador, sir. Why do you think China has decided to do this now? Just hours after India announces that formal ceasefire with Pakistan, you have China attempting to do what it keeps doing again.
Well, you're absolutely right in saying that China has done what it keeps doing time and again. In fact, this is the fifth time in the last 8 years that Beijing has announced the renaming of places in Arunachal Pradesh. Its first attempt was in 2017, and this was followed by those in 2021, 2023, and 2024. Now, India has consistently rejected such Chinese attempts. Last year, Beijing protested against Prime Minister Modi's visit to the Indian state to inaugurate the Sela Tunnel, which provides all-weather connectivity to the a strategically important town of Taiwan. Now, just as Prime Minister was visiting the state, the Chinese Foreign and Defense Ministries published a series of statements over Beijing's claims on Arunachal Pradesh. And last year in early March, the US also opposed any Chinese attempt to unilaterally advance its territorial claim over our state. Now, this latest notification is very importantly timed. It came a day after India and Pakistan announced a bilateral understanding to cease armed hostilities. If you remember, between 7th and 10th May, our armed forces and those of Pakistan carried out some kinetic action.
Correct.
And on the 7th of May, we had launched the Operation Sindoor, which was a response to the 22nd April terrorist attack in Jammu and Kashmir's Pahalgam district.
You're right,
and
sir.
26 people died. Now, a day after all this was unfolding, China comes up with this sort of a new attempt to rename Arunachal Pradesh. And this is purely Chinese mischief. It is not new. We know how to deal with it, and we have dismissed it. We have said that China's attempts to rename some places in Arunachal Pradesh are preposterous.
Yes.
And these will not alter the undeniable reality that the state was, is, and will always remain an integral part of India. Let me also mention, very, very importantly, that our ministry spokesman has said that consistent with our principled position, we reject such attempts categorically.
Yes, but sir, both you and I think both the gentlemen also on the show, they do know that there is more to this story than what meets the eye. It's just not about changing a name or trying to attempt this again and again. And India calling that out. And because you touched upon that issue, on our screens, we'll tell our viewers also, are multiple instances, starting from 2017 to 2025, at least 5 attempts, ladies and gentlemen. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but at least 5 attempts by China to repeat that aggression. Every time we have told China back off because Arunachal Pradesh was, is and will forever be ours. But Brahmachalani, why don't you opine more about this larger nexus, the timing of this and the fact that you have seen the Chinese-based weapon systems that was used in Pakistan completely obliterated and that was hammered by India. Is that the reason why you're looking at this?
Well, first, India is the only country in the world wedged between two closely aligned nuclear powers, China and Pakistan, both of which lay claim to sizable but different parts of Indian territory. And just on Prime Minister Modi's watch, the crises that India has faced, from brutal Pakistani terror attacks from Pathankot to Pahalgam, to brazen Chinese land grabs in Doklam and Ladakh, all these crises have highlighted just how acute a threat the Sino-Pakistani strategic axis poses to India. And we should not forget that China has consistently provided cover for Pakistan's export of terrorism. It has repeatedly blocked UN sanctions against top Pakistani terrorists, and after the Pahalgam massacre, it praised Pakistan's quote-unquote counter-terrorism efforts. In fact, in the days after Pahalgam, expecting India to respond militarily, China rushed new weapon systems to Pakistan, including air-to-air missiles, which Pakistan used against India in this operation. But I think on the issue of this demographic and cartographic aggression that Beijing is mounting, this campaign to sinicize names of places in Arunachal Pradesh is part of Beijing's efforts to advance its territorial claims through dispute creation. Now, India has been just dismissive of China's renaming of places, right? We again today were quite dismissive of China's latest renaming of places. But India remains loath to counter China's efforts by highlighting more fundamental issues. For example, the Dalai Lama has said repeatedly that China's claims to Arunachal Pradesh has no historical basis. We are loath to even highlight Dalai Lama's statements that Arunachal has never been part of Tibet.
Yes.
In fact, since ancient times, the Himalayas have universally been regarded as the northern frontier of India. But having annexed Tibet and then seized several Indian territories through conquest, China now lays claim to areas far south of the Himalayan watershed.
You're right.
And this is underscored by his claim to Arunachal. Arunachal is south of the Himalayan watershed. And we need to be a bit more, less reactive, and seek to counter China's game plan by being somewhat proactive. Let's put China on the defensive. Why is it that we are always reacting? That approach only allows China to keep provoking us.
Okay. Okay, I think that's a good point, and a good point to get D.P. Srivastavaji, who's also former ambassador, to get into this conversation. Sir, do you agree with what you've just heard from Brahma Chalani? I mean, is there really more that India can do and should be doing instead of just, calling out the bluff by China every time they want to do this? Because in real times, a lot of you will also agree that this is a two-front war.
I agree with him, but let me add something else.
So,
there's something very interesting about the timing of this statement by China. If we link it with Pakistan, then how do you explain that the statement was made 3 days after Pakistan and India decided to stop military activities? If they wanted to put pressure, maximum pressure, they could have made the same statement a week earlier. They did not do that. So we have to keep in mind this nuance that they want to put pressure. These statements off and on are meant to put pressures. There's this phrase in a different context, which we have all heard, I'll not mention, but you can guess, the art of diplomacy. The Chinese are the original masters at the art of diplomacy by creating these pressure points, but they do not link it to, they do not want the junior partner to dictate their timing, so they have kept it separate. Now, the second point, and which is what Mr. Brahmachalani just now mentioned, that we need not be reactive. I agree entirely. Now, if that is the case, how should we react? And I think we have to keep reminding people, and these, in terms of by way of various statements, that leave alone Arunachal, China's claim on Tibet, that itself rests on very shaky grounds, and it is of a very recent origin. Tibet was, for long periods of Chinese history, it was independent. In 1914, Shimla Convention, there was, which was signed by the Chinese representative. Tibet participated as an equal partner. There was a dispute, but the dispute was not about Tibet-India border. Dispute was about Tibet's border with China, which is a different thing. So there's a major issue here, that before we, allow them to dictate their terms by pushing into Arunachal Pradesh, I think it's high time we revisit the Tibet issue. And that is one way of, replying to them in kind.
Okay, when you say this, sir, I will just put out a little correction. And with due respect, I mean, the day the ceasefire is officially confirmed by India, the very next day is when China puts out, this particular name-changing spree of its and the details that were out in the public domain. And people obviously say that this possibly could be an attempt to deflect attention from a lot of reverses that you've seen China itself suffering with the war that we have seen vis-a-vis India and Pakistan. But I just have enough time to make way for the second comment from all three of you gentlemen.
No, Deepti,
Yes,
let me just come in.
Yes, sir.
That my first point still remains valid. If they wanted to put pressure, they could have done it while the hostilities were on.
So why do you think this has happened, sir?
So they have maintained a distinction. They want to put pressure on us, but they don't want their own position to be dictated by the junior partner.
Okay. But that isn't a surprise. You know, Pakistan is not even the big story here. The big story is obviously China. Prabhu Dayal, sir, do you believe that China is more dangerous than Pak, and that is the front that we need to be prepared to deal with?
Of course, China is a much bigger danger than Pakistan, and we will have to confront this danger. Now, let me say a few words about the timing.
Yes.
Nobody, including the Chinese, expected that the Pakistanis would cave in so quickly. It came as a surprise to the Chinese. So, whatever they did a day after the Pakistanis sought the ceasefire was because that was the quickest they could do. Believe me, most countries in the world expected this conflict to drag on, even the Americans and the Chinese too. So, as far as the timing is concerned, it was the quickest they could have done because they were really caught off guard. Now, secondly, as regards China, it is an expansionist country. It is expanding territorially. It has grand designs of doing so. Of course, it is also an economically expansionist country. Both territorial expansionism and economic expansionism, these are the hallmarks of Chinese foreign policy. Now, China is in occupation of a huge tract of Indian territory, which it occupied in the 62 war. And also, Pakistan ceded to it some part of POK because Pakistan was able to strike a deal which made China friendly towards it. And they did so by giving our territory to China. So China already occupies a huge tract of Indian territory. It covets much, much more. This appetite has to be curbed. We are prepared for it. China tried its best during the Doklam crisis to send a message across that it's going to be aggressive, but I think we hit back and the message went across to them to take care. We are prepared for any sort of Chinese aggression. So I repeat, China's mischief makes it a much, much greater threat to us than Pakistan, but we are prepared to face all threats.
Okay, Brahmachalani, you agree? And what ideally should be our response in such a situation vis-a-vis China?
First, let's see what's the basis of China's claim to Arunachal. It began in 2006 calling Arunachal South Tibet. South Tibet. In other words, it's part of the Tibet plateau, but it's South Tibet. Then more recently, it switched to a Sinicized name, Zagnan for Arunachal Pradesh. So the alleged basis of China's claim to Arunachal Pradesh highlights that Tibet is the core issue in India-China relations by Beijing's own claim. So why doesn't India capitalize on this to say that China's own assertions show that Tibet is the real issue in India-China relations? And therefore, we must focus on Tibet, on resolving the Tibet issue for the relationship to advance. And this really actually extends the argument that Ambassador Srivastava made, that we have under successive governments accepted Tibet as part of the People's Republic of China. We need to add some flexibility to that stance. Otherwise, we will have no leverage. But even going by what China says about its claim to Arunachal Pradesh, we have clear basis to say that Tibet is the core issue in Sino-Indian relations. that itself will put Beijing on the defensive.
And when you make that point, Srivastava ji, I just have the last few minutes and I'll leave it to you. When you look at this entire story, you know, we do talk very often about Pakistan, the terror camps and a lot more. And India is more vociferous when it comes to responding to the rogue state Pakistan. But when it comes to China, we clearly see a different approach. We are clearly a little bit more cautious, also keeping in mind that Pakistan and China are not the same, though they obviously work together. But how could you see this entire story moving ahead? Is China just going to stop here, considering what has happened vis-a-vis Pakistan, or you see this story escalating?
You know, let me go back to an earlier remark by Mr. Brahmachalani. That is, how do we resolve Tibet issue? There's going to be no resolution because the problem has been created by China with a view to put India down. So the only answer to China is to build up our strength. And once China realizes that that India is strong enough and it is counterproductive to put pressure, which will only strengthen or which will only weaken China in relative terms, or put more pressure on its western flank while it is, or southern flank while it is engaged on the eastern flank with US. Only then it will drop these kind of irritants. These irritants are deliberately put to keep us distracted and to put us down. The answer is building strength.
All right, you're saying building strength. Brahmachalani also saying let's just change the terms of this engagement. I think these are interesting talking points. And Prabhu Dayalji, as always, has some very interesting insight to tell us more about why we've seen this entire issue and the timing of this. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to speaking to you again soon. As I'll say good evening to all these gentlemen and make way now for Newsnight's Pakistan. Now, exactly 27 years ago, you had the late Defense Minister, George Fernandez. He dubbed China as the threat number one. A lot of people then questioned him. But with a precarious ceasefire that you see on the Western Front, India, ladies and gentlemen, cannot take its eyes off from China too. And that is also a reality because you see the China-Pak tango and almost something that is now known in the circles across the world. So what is the crux? The crux is that the China-Pak tango is not just dangerous, it is real. And India should remain ready for any kind of surprise. And by all indications, we would want to believe that India is ready to do exactly that. Thank you for watching. Good night.